Ethan never thought his life would lead to this moment. He was just a regular human, living in a world that was small, confined to the boundaries of Earth. Little did he know that beyond the stars, a far greater adventure awaited him, one that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe. It all began when a message arrived, not from a government, not from a secret agency, but from a distant queen. Ethan had always been curious, an explorer at heart, and when the message came, he was both shocked and intrigued. It was an invitation, unlike any invitation he had ever received before. A direct communication from Queen Zelara of the Tsarion Empire, a powerful and ancient alien race. The message was simple but direct. The Queen had been observing Earth for some time, and she had taken an interest in Ethan. His bravery, his intelligence, and his adaptability had caught her attention. She had chosen him for a task, one that no human had ever been chosen for before. The Queen ordered Ethan to come and live with her daughter, Princess Ila, on her royal ship. Ethan was to serve as a companion and guide to the princess, to help her understand the ways of humanity. This, according to the Queen, would aid in fostering better relations between her people and the humans of Earth. The invitation came with a sense of urgency. There was no time for doubt. Ethan was to leave Earth immediately and travel to the Queen's ship, which was somewhere beyond the farthest reaches of the solar system. No one knew where exactly, and he was given no option to decline. Ethan had always wanted to see the stars, to explore the unknown, but never had he imagined being thrust into such an extraordinary situation. He had no idea what to expect from the alien world he was about to step into. His heart raced with excitement, and a sense of disbelief lingered in the back of his mind. When he boarded the ship, he was greeted by an alien officer who didn't speak much. The officer simply guided him to a large chamber where he was to meet Princess Ila. The room was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, a vast, glowing space that seemed to stretch forever, with walls made of shimmering, translucent material that pulsed with energy. There were strange plants growing in the corners, their bioluminescent colors flickering in the dim light. The air smelled faintly of something floral, something that was entirely alien to Earth. Ethan stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do or say. Then the princess entered. She was tall, with a graceful presence that radiated authority. Her long, silver-blue hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes were a piercing shade of violet that seemed to glow in the low light. Her skin had a soft, ethereal glow to it, and she wore a flowing gown made from some unknown fabric that seemed to shift colors as she moved. The gown was elegant, but not overly elaborate, simple, yet regal in its own right. Ila's gaze fell on Ethan, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Ethan couldn't help but feel small, like he was nothing more than an insect before her, but she didn't seem to be looking at him with judgment. Instead, there was a certain curiosity in her expression, as though she was studying him, trying to understand what kind of being he was. "Ethan, I presume?" Her voice was melodic, soft, but with an edge of formality that made it clear she was a princess. "I am Princess Ila." Ethan nodded, his mouth dry. "Yes, Your Highness." She didn't offer a smile. Instead, she simply motioned for him to follow her as she turned and walked toward a set of chairs in the center of the room. Ethan followed, feeling more out of place than ever. "I understand you have been chosen to assist me," Ila said, her voice distant. "You are to teach me about your world, about your people." Ethan didn't know how to respond. "I don't know much about my world, Your Highness," he said awkwardly. "But I'm happy to help however I can." She raised an eyebrow. "How humble, I expected a little more confidence from someone chosen by my mother." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to answer that. "I've never been in a situation like this before," he said honestly. "But I'll try my best." Ila studied him for a moment longer, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. "My mother has her reasons, I suppose. She believes I can learn something from you. She believes humanity has something to offer me." She leaned back in her chair, her hands folding in her lap. "But I'm not so sure." The princess's words stung. Ethan hadn't expected to be met with such coldness, but he understood. He was just a human, a species that Ila had probably been taught to see as inferior, primitive. To her, humans might have been nothing more than an interesting experiment or a curiosity. He couldn't blame her for being skeptical. "I'm not here to change you or your way of life," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm just here to help, if you'll let me." Ila didn't respond immediately. She merely stared at him for a moment before standing up and walking to the window. The room seemed to grow even larger as she gazed out into the stars, her back to him. Ethan sat there in silence, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. The princess wasn't welcoming, nor was she hostile. She was distant, lost in her own thoughts. "I'm not used to this," Ela said, breaking the silence. "To having someone like you around. Humans are unpredictable. You're so different from us. You lack the discipline we have." Ethan shifted in his seat. "We have discipline too, just in our own way." Ela didn't turn around. "You say that, but I see nothing but chaos in your species. Look at the world you've made for yourselves." Her words hit him like a slap. It was true, of course. Humanity had caused a lot of damage to their own planet. But he didn't want to defend the mistakes of his people. Instead, he chose to speak from the heart. "We may have flaws, but we also have hope, and we change, we adapt." Ela turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Hope?" she asked, her voice softening just slightly. "Is that all you have?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, hope and the ability to change, that's what makes us different." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, though not as though she agreed. "We'll see." The silence between them stretched on for a while. Ethan didn't know what else to say, and it seemed like Ela wasn't ready to open up more. He stood up to leave, but just before he turned, Ela spoke again. "Ethan," she said quietly, almost as if testing the sound of his name, "I don't know what my mother expects from this arrangement, but I'll tell you this, I'm not interested in some human tutor. I don't need you to teach me lessons on humanity, I know enough." Ethan was taken aback. "Then, why am I here?" Ela paused. "To prove something, to prove to my mother that I can understand you, that I can learn from you. But you're right about one thing, humans are unpredictable, so we'll see if this works or if it fails." Ethan nodded, trying to make sense of everything. The situation was unlike anything he'd ever faced. He didn't know if he could change Ela's mind about humanity, but he was determined to try. For his species, for her. As he left the room, the doors sliding shut behind him, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would he truly be able to teach the princess about humanity, or would this be an experiment destined to fail? He didn't know. But one thing was certain. He had no choice but to find out. The following days on the Queen's ship were a mix of uncertainty and uncomfortable silence. Ethan had hoped that, over time, Princess Ela would begin to warm to him, but instead, things seemed to grow more distant. She still viewed him as little more than an experiment, a curiosity her mother had sent to teach her about humans. Every interaction felt like walking on thin ice, fragile, careful, and full of misunderstandings. Ela kept her distance, always busy with her royal duties. The ship, as magnificent as it was, felt cold and impersonal, much like its inhabitants. Every room, every corridor was decorated with alien art and materials Ethan had never seen before. Yet, despite all its grandeur, Ethan found the ship empty, devoid of any real life. No laughter, no sound of children playing, no chatter between friends. It was all so silent, as if the ship itself was waiting for something to happen. One afternoon, after a long meeting with various advisors, Ela called Ethan to her chambers. He wasn't sure what to expect, but the princess's tone was more inviting than usual. When he arrived, she was sitting at a large desk, scrolling through holographic images and documents. She didn't look up when he entered, which was a typical sign of her disinterest. Still, Ethan felt a small sense of hope. Perhaps she was ready to speak, to share something about herself for the first time. "Sit down, Ethan," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, but there was a tension beneath it. Ethan obeyed, sitting across from her at the table. Ela seemed lost in thought, her fingers moving over the holograms with practiced ease. For a long time, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the ship's machinery in the background. Finally, Ela spoke, breaking the silence. "You told me that humans are adaptable," she said, her voice almost distant. "That you change, but I don't see that. You seem the same, always trying to prove something." She looked up then, her violet eyes locking with his. "Why?" Ethan was taken aback by the question. "Because that's what we do. We're not perfect, but we find ways to survive, to adapt. We make mistakes and then we try to fix them." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's not about proving something to others, it's about proving it to ourselves. We push forward because we have to. That's the nature of humanity." Ela studied him for a long time, her gaze unwavering. She seemed to consider his words, but there was a hint of skepticism in her eyes. "I don't think I understand you at all." You speak of hope of change, but I don't see it in the actions of your people. You've destroyed your planet, you fight wars, you create chaos. Ethan's face hardened slightly, but he didn't lose his calm. Yes, we've made mistakes. We've hurt each other and we've hurt the Earth, but that's not all we've done. We've also built things, made discoveries, helped each other. We've made progress. And yet you're still so small, Ela said softly, almost to herself. You're so different from us, from me. Ethan leaned forward slightly. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Ela. You're not so different from us. You may have advanced technology and a long history, but at the end of the day, you feel the same things we do. Fear, hope, loneliness. We're all just trying to figure out where we fit in this vast universe. Ela looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond right away, and Ethan felt the weight of the silence again. He wasn't sure if she was reflecting on his words or simply dismissing them. Either way, there was a sense that something between them had shifted, though he couldn't tell if it was for better or worse. After a few moments, Ela stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the stars. I'm not like you, she said quietly. I've never been. I've been groomed to rule, to control, to carry my mother's legacy. I've never had the freedom you have. I don't know what it's like to make mistakes and learn from them. I only know what's expected of me. Ethan watched her for a moment, unsure of what to say. There was vulnerability in her words, something he hadn't expected to see. The princess wasn't as cold and untouchable as he had assumed. She was just as lost and uncertain as anyone else. You don't have to be like her, Ethan said softly. You don't have to carry your mother's burden if it's not what you want. You can make your own path. Ela turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his face. And what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough? My mother has always said that if I don't live up to her expectations, I'll bring dishonor to our people. Ethan stood up slowly, walking toward her. Everyone fails. It's not about how many times you fall, it's about how many times you get up and try again. And you don't have to be strong in the way she wants you to be, you just have to be yourself. Ela didn't say anything for a long time. Ethan could see the inner conflict in her eyes, the struggle between her duty to her mother and her own desires, her fear of stepping out of her shadow. He had no idea what it would take to make her see that she was capable of more than she thought. But he wasn't going to give up on her. Not yet. The next few days were filled with long, tense meetings with other members of the Tsarion Empire. Ethan accompanied Ela, though he was often left in the background, a silent observer to the politics of the alien world. Ela seemed distant again, focused on her duties, and Ethan couldn't help but feel like an outsider. He had hoped their conversation would have opened a door between them, but it seemed to have done little more than create a small crack. It wasn't until one evening, when they were preparing to leave for another diplomatic mission, that things finally began to change. Ela approached him as he was packing his belongings. Ethan, she said, her voice soft. I've been thinking about what you said. About making my own path. Ethan looked up at her, surprised by the shift in her tone. I didn't think you'd take me seriously. I didn't either, she admitted, but something about your words, they made sense. I've been so focused on what my mother wants for me that I've never stopped to ask what I want. I don't know if I'm ready to rule, but I do know that I can't keep living in her shadow. Ethan smiled gently. You don't have to be ready now. No one is ever really ready. You just take it one step at a time. Ela nodded, her gaze softening. For the first time since meeting her, Ethan saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe in herself. That night, as they left for the mission, Ethan felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt before. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He and Ela had taken the first step toward something more than just a simple mission. They had started to understand each other, to see each other beyond their differences. And that, Ethan thought, was the first real step in the journey ahead. The days that followed were different. Ethan could feel a change in the air, a subtle shift that made the tension between him and Ela feel less heavy. The princess, for the first time, seemed to genuinely want his presence. He noticed it in the way she greeted him, the way she spoke to him, even in the small glances she gave him when she thought he wasn't looking. She was still distant, still guarded, but there was something in her eyes now, something softer, less closed off. The mission they were about to embark on was a delicate one. The Tsarion Empire had long been in a cold war with a neighboring planet, and Ela's presence was necessary to ensure peace between their factions. Ethan, as usual, wasn't entirely sure why he had been chosen for the mission. but he knew it had something to do with his role in Iola's life. The queen, despite her distance, believed in his potential to help the princess navigate these intergalactic challenges. Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready for that responsibility, but he had no choice but to accept it. They traveled in silence for most of the journey. The spacecraft was sleek and elegant, gliding through space with ease, and the hum of the engines was constant. Ethan spent his time gazing out of the large windows, watching the stars streak past them. Space was beautiful, but it also felt endlessly lonely. He was a human on an alien ship, surrounded by a species he couldn't fully understand. Iola was his only company, and even though their conversations were few, he couldn't help but feel a connection building between them. When they finally arrived at the planet, the tension in the air was palpable. The meeting was to take place in a large, sprawling hall, surrounded by alien architecture that was both alien and familiar in its design. The walls were made of strange metals that shimmered under the artificial light, and the ceiling was domed, allowing a view of the planet's distant moon. Iola stood before him, her posture regal but tight, her eyes scanning the room. She seemed calm, but Ethan could sense the storm brewing beneath the surface. He had seen her like this before, holding everything in, maintaining the facade of a perfect princess. But he knew the truth now. He knew that the weight of her position was more than she could bear. The pressure, the expectations of the Empire, the constant push to be something she wasn't, it all weighed on her even if she never showed it. "I'm not sure I can do this," Iola whispered, barely audible as she turned to Ethan. He was surprised. She had always seemed so sure of herself, so confident in her role as the princess. Yet here she was, admitting her doubt. It wasn't the kind of thing Iola ever said aloud. "You don't have to be perfect, Iola," Ethan replied quietly. "You just have to be you." Her eyes flickered toward him, and for the briefest moment he saw something real, something vulnerable. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Iola straightened up, her face becoming an impassive mask once again. "We have to go now," she said, her voice steady, though Ethan could hear the faint tremor beneath it. They entered the hall together, and Ethan followed Iola as she approached the leaders of the opposing faction. There were 3 of them, 2 males and 1 female, each wearing a dark cloak that hid most of their features. They stood in a line, waiting for Iola to approach. Ethan could feel the weight of their gaze on him, but he kept his head down, knowing that his presence was more of an accessory to the meeting than anything else. Iola stopped a few feet away from the delegation, her posture stiff. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. The leaders exchanged glances, clearly sizing up the princess. Ethan could tell that they were not impressed. He didn't blame them. They had every reason to be skeptical of someone so young, someone who had never truly experienced the world outside her mother's palace. Iola spoke first, her voice echoing in the room. "I come in the hopes of securing peace between our people. I come not only as a princess, but as an individual who wishes to see our nations thrive." Her words were formal, practiced, but there was an edge to them. She was trying to assert herself, to take control of the situation. Ethan could see her struggling with the weight of her mother's expectations, but she was doing her best. One of the males, the tallest of the group, stepped forward. His voice was cold. "And why should we trust you? Your mother's reign has been a failure. What makes you think you can bring about change?" Iola's face tightened, and for a moment Ethan thought she might break. But then something changed in her eyes. She stood taller, her voice gaining strength. "Because I am not my mother," she said, her words sharp. "I am Iola of the Tsarion Empire, and I will prove to you that I can do what she could not." The tension in the room was thick, but Iola didn't falter. She stood her ground, and slowly the opposing faction members nodded in approval. It wasn't much, but it was something. The meeting continued with negotiations, with words exchanged in carefully calculated patterns, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in Iola. She was growing before his eyes, shedding the skin of the princess she had been forced to be and stepping into the woman she could become. By the time the meeting ended, the first step toward peace had been made. The factions agreed to a temporary ceasefire with the promise of further discussions in the near future. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was progress. And for Iola, that was more than she had ever hoped for. As they left the hall, Iola remained quiet, her mind clearly racing. Ethan followed her, not sure what to say. She was different now, more confident, but still uncertain. He could see the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders, and he knew she was struggling to bear it. I did it, she said quietly, almost to herself. I actually did it. Ethan smiled gently. You did. You stood up for what you believe in. That's more than most people ever do. Ela glanced at him, her expression softening for the first time. I never thought I could do that. I always thought I would be just like my mother, controlled, confined. But today I felt like I was really me, like I could actually make a difference. Ethan nodded. You can, you already are. They walked in silence for a while, side by side, until they reached the ship's observation deck. The stars outside seemed to stretch endlessly, as if there were no limits to what they could achieve. Ela stopped and looked out at the vastness of space, her eyes reflecting the light of the distant stars. There's so much out there, she said softly, so much I've never seen, never even imagined. Ethan stood beside her, gazing out at the stars as well. Yeah, there's a lot. But you don't have to see it all right away. You can take it one step at a time, just like you did today. Ela turned to him, her expression serious. I don't know where this path will take me, Ethan, but I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to walk it. For the first time, Ethan felt that the princess wasn't just a figurehead. She wasn't the person she had been trained to be. She was Ela, a woman finding her own way in a vast, uncertain universe. And that, he thought, was something truly remarkable. As they stood together in the quiet of space, Ethan realized that their journey was just beginning. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, side by side. And maybe, just maybe, they could change the galaxy, one small step at a time. The atmosphere in the royal ship had shifted in the days following their successful diplomatic mission. Ela had changed. The weight of her responsibilities still lingered on her shoulders, but there was a newfound strength in her step. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was beginning to carve out her own path, separate from the expectations her mother had placed on her. And for the first time, she was grateful for Ethan's presence. His support had been invaluable in helping her get to this point. Yet, despite her progress, the challenges were far from over. There were still many obstacles in her way, and the queen, her mother, was watching closely. Ela could feel the pressure mounting. The queen's expectations were always there, hovering just above her head, a constant reminder that her actions were never just for herself. They were for the empire, they were for the future. Ethan, too, felt the tension. He had come a long way from being a simple human brought aboard a spaceship. He had grown to understand Ela better, to see her as more than just a princess with a perfect life. She was a young woman struggling to define her identity, to live up to the impossible standards placed upon her. He wanted to help her, but sometimes he wondered if he was doing more harm than good. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, Ela sought him out. Ethan was in his quarters, going through some human literature he had brought with him, trying to distract himself from the growing sense of unease that lingered in his chest. When he heard the soft knock on his door, he looked up in surprise. Ela, he called, standing up quickly. The door slid open and the princess entered, her face serious. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced with an expression of frustration and confusion. Ethan could tell something was wrong. I need to talk to you, Ela said, her voice tight. I don't know what to do anymore. Ethan gestured for her to sit, his concern growing. What's going on? You can talk to me. Ela paced the room for a moment, clearly struggling with her thoughts. Finally, she stopped and turned to face him. I thought I was ready. I thought I could handle all of this, the responsibilities, the pressure, the endless expectations. But every time I take a step forward, it feels like something is holding me back. It's like I can never be free. Ethan watched her closely, feeling a deep sense of empathy. He had seen this side of her before, the part of her that longed for something more, something beyond the walls of duty and obligation. She had never asked for this life, and yet she was expected to embrace it fully. I get it, Ethan said quietly. I know what it's like to feel like you don't have control over your own life, but you have more control than you think. Ela looked at him, her eyes filled with frustration. But it's not just about control, it's about the weight of everyone's expectations. My mother. She wants me to be exactly like her. She wants me to follow in her footsteps to take over her empire, but I'm not her. I don't want to be her, and yet I can't escape it. It's like I'm trapped in her shadow. Ethan could see the tears welling up in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. It hurt him to see her like this, so vulnerable, so uncertain. He had always admired her strength, but in this moment he saw the young woman behind the crown. The one who was just trying to figure out who she was, separate from the expectations that weighed her down. You don't have to be her, Ela, Ethan said gently. You don't have to carry her legacy if you don't want to. You can create your own. It's going to be hard, but you're not alone. You have me and you have the power to make your own choices. Ela shook her head. It's not that simple. There are too many forces at play. My mother, the Empire, they'll never let me be who I want to be. I can't just turn my back on everything I've been raised to do. Ethan stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Maybe you don't have to turn your back on it. Maybe you just need to reshape it. You're not powerless, Ela. You have the strength to make your own decisions. You've already started to. You stood up to the leaders of the other planet. That took courage. Ela's expression softened slightly, though doubt still clouded her eyes. I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep going. What if I fail? Ethan smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. Failure is just another part of learning. No one is perfect, least of all you or me. But if you keep going, if you keep pushing forward, you'll figure it out. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. For a long moment, Ela stood still, her eyes closed as if considering his words. Then slowly she opened her eyes and looked at him. Thank you, she said softly. I needed to hear that. Ethan nodded. Any time. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Ela seemed calmer now, though there was still a sense of unease in the air. Ethan knew this was only the beginning for her. She had taken her first steps toward finding herself, but there was still a long road ahead. He could only hope that, in time, she would find the strength she needed to become the leader she was meant to be. Not the leader her mother wanted her to be, but the one she could shape for herself. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and strategic discussions. Ela was more present than ever, her confidence growing with each decision she made. Ethan could see the change in her, the way she began to take charge of the conversations, the way she started to voice her own opinions more freely. It was a slow transformation, but it was happening, and he was proud of her. But even as she grew stronger, the shadow of her mother's influence loomed large. Every time they discussed important matters, the Queen's name was mentioned. Every decision Ela made seemed to be weighed against the legacy of the Tsarion Empire and the expectations that came with it. The pressure was overwhelming, and Ethan could see that it was starting to take a toll on her. One day, after a particularly grueling meeting, Ela pulled Ethan aside. I don't know how much longer I can do this, she said, her voice strained. I feel like I'm constantly walking a tightrope, trying to balance everything. The Empire, my mother's legacy. It's too much. Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she slumped against the wall, as if the weight of the universe was bearing down on her. He knew she was struggling, but he also knew that she wasn't alone. He was here and he would help her carry the burden. You don't have to do it alone, Ethan said softly. I'm right here with you, Ela, and you can take a break when you need it. You don't have to carry all of this at once. Ela looked at him, her expression weary but grateful. Thank you, Ethan. You've been a true friend to me, he smiled gently. That's what friends are for. The days ahead would be challenging, but Ethan could see that Ela was starting to believe in herself. The road to becoming the leader she wanted to be wouldn't be easy, but with each step, she was learning to trust herself more. And that, Ethan thought, was the most important thing of all. As they stood together, side by side, staring out at the stars, Ela felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely alone. She had Ethan, and she had the courage to take the next step. Whatever the future held, she was ready to face it, and that for Ela was enough.